Welcome to Nick Scary Stories. In tonight's video, we delve into the eerie and unsettling world of haunted houses. These 5 terrifying tales will take you from the shadowy corners of old, creaking homes to the chilling presence that lurks in brand new houses, because even fresh walls can't protect you from the horrors of haunted ground. The air is heavy, the silence is deafening, the shadows seem alive. So turn off the lights, settle into the darkness, and let these stories pull you into their sinister embrace. These haunted house stories are not for the faint of heart. Story number 1. As your storyteller, let me begin by sharing my own personal paranormal experience, right in the house where my family and I currently live. I watched this house being built from the ground up, and my family was the very first to call it home. Despite its newness, we've experienced some truly strange and unexplained events. In 2014, my wife and I finalized some paperwork and had Granville build our house. It was constructed near the Shannon River, a place with a long and dark history. Countless people lost their lives there due to violence and disease, and many bodies were buried along its banks a long time ago. Despite this, Granville was planning to develop brand new homes near the river, and I loved the idea. It was close to some of my favorite fishing spots. Our house was completed in February 2016, and that's when my wife and I moved in. I love my house. Being the first owner, I don't think I'll ever move out. However, I've started to believe that my house might be sitting on some kind of portal, a gateway between our world and the spirit world. I have no solid evidence, but I've experienced things that make me wonder. For example, whenever I tell scary stories, I try not to mention the names of people who have passed away. One time I told a story about an old woman who died and supposedly turned into a tiger. I mentioned her name, thinking it was safe since she had passed away long ago in Southeast Asia. As I was telling the story, there was a metal chair behind me. Suddenly, I heard a noise, as if someone had just sat down on it. It sounded like the weight of someone pressing into the chair. Maybe I was just being paranoid, but it was enough to make me rethink mentioning names in my stories. One early morning, I couldn't sleep, so I got up to watch some YouTube videos and snack on some chips. I didn't bother turning on the lights because my wife had little night lights placed around the house, which made it easy to see. As I sat in the dining room watching YouTube on my phone, my cup of water was next to me. At one point, when I reached for the cup, it felt like someone pushed it toward my hand. Another time, my wife was on the sofa watching TV. Later, she told me she saw me sitting in the dining room using my laptop. She kept watching TV until she heard the hairdryer turn on in the bathroom. That's when it hit her. I couldn't have been in the dining room, because I was in the bathroom. When she looked back at the dining room, no one was there. This wasn't the first time she had seen me in places I wasn't. It had happened 3 times since we moved in. One night, I was lying in bed, getting ready to sleep. The bedroom door was open, and I thought my wife was still in the living room. The kitchen light was on, but I was too lazy to get up and turn it off. From the bed, I yelled, "Babe, can you turn off the kitchen light?" A moment later, the light turned off. I was about to thank her when I heard the toilet flush. She came out of the bathroom and asked, "Did you say something?" I was stunned. I asked her if she had turned off the kitchen light, but she said she hadn't. One morning, I got up to use the bathroom. When I came back, I saw my wife still sleeping in bed. I checked my phone. 5:45 a.m. She usually gets up at 5:30 to get ready for work, so I figured she might be extra tired and needed a few more minutes of sleep. I turned off my phone and lay back down. By 5:50, she still hadn't gotten up. I started thinking maybe work had called her off for the day. I decided I should wake her up to make sure she wouldn't be late. Our baby was sleeping between us, so I reached over to her side of the bed. But her spot was empty. I flashed my phone light at her side of the bed. She wasn't there. I swear when I came back from the bathroom, I saw her lying there. This house is new, but it's strange. Despite the odd experiences, I believe that if there's a spirit in this house, it might be a good one. My dogs are fine. My family is healthy. We've been able to achieve financial stability. I've heard of people living in haunted houses with bad spirits, and their lives are nothing like ours. Those houses are filled with constant arguments, financial instability, sickness, depression, nightmares, even sleep paralysis. That's not the case for us. What do you think? Is my story number 2. The longer I stayed in that room, the more I felt like I was being watched. It was an eerie, uncomfortable feeling I couldn't shake. Some nights, the uneasiness became too much, and I'd sleep in the living room instead. Out there, I felt fine. No strange feelings, no sense of being watched. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, or maybe nerves from starting my first travel assignment. Then, one night, I woke up in my bedroom because I was cold. My blanket had fallen to the floor. I was going to reach for it, but I froze. In the corner of the room, I could see the outline of a person, standing there, staring at me. My heart raced. I was too scared to move, too scared to even breathe loudly. I closed my eyes tightly, hoping it was just a trick of the light. But when I opened them, the figure was still there. I repeated this a few times, squeezing my eyes shut, reopening them, until eventually it was gone. I told myself it was just exhaustion, that I was overworked and imagining things. But then, when I turned to pick up my blanket, I caught something out of the corner of my eye. A face, quickly ducking down, as if trying to hide from me. My stomach dropped. I looked again, but there was nothing there. Just my blanket on the floor. After that night, things escalated. I started hearing scratching sounds on the walls and light tapping on the window. Some nights I'd feel my bed shaking slightly, waking me up in a panic, only to find everything still. I couldn't sleep in that room anymore. On my days off, I'd nap in the living room until my roommates came home from their shifts. Then I'd move back to my room, pretending everything was normal. I tried to talk to my roommates about it, but they said they hadn't experienced anything strange. They were new to the area too, both traveling nurses like me. I didn't want to sound crazy, but the sleepless nights were taking their toll. Finally, I decided to ask the landlord about the house. I approached him carefully, trying to sound polite but firm as I asked if anyone had ever reported anything strange about the property. His face paled. He hesitated before answering. The last tenant, she was a nurse too, he said. She lived there for about 6 months before she died. Heart attack, they said. He paused, looking away, then continued in a lower voice. But she'd been complaining about something following her. Said it wouldn't let her sleep. My blood ran cold. I broke my lease the very next day. My 2 roommates were as shocked as I was. They had no idea about the previous tenant or her experiences. To this day, I can't explain what happened in that house, but I've learned to trust my instincts. Sometimes places hold memories, and sometimes they hold something much, much worse. Story number 3. In 2016, my wife and I purchased a house that had been built in 2003. According to our realtor, no one had ever died in the house, which was part of the reason it wasn't cheap. It was a beautiful home, and my wife and I fell in love with it instantly. My wife works night shifts, so I'm usually at home with our 2 daughters. One is 7 years old, and the other is 4. One evening, after putting my 4-year-old to bed, she told me something unsettling. She said she sometimes sees a man in the house. Curious and a little concerned, I asked her what the man looked like. She said he was tall and mentioned that she often saw him when I wasn't home. That night, I couldn't sleep. A thought crossed my mind. Could my wife be cheating on me? Could she be bringing someone over when I wasn't around? The next morning, when my wife came home from work, she found me sitting on the couch, wide awake and watching TV. She asked why I was up so early. That's when I confronted her. I asked if she was cheating on me and bringing a man over when I wasn't home. She immediately denied it and got angry that I was accusing her of something she hadn't done. We argued. Finally, I explained what our 4-year-old had told me the night before. My wife dismissed it, saying maybe our daughter was just imagining things. But then, she admitted something. She said she had always felt uneasy about the house. It was too quiet, too dark, gave her an uncomfortable vibe. Frustrated with our argument, she went to take a quick shower and then headed to bed without talking to me further. A strange incident happened one Saturday morning. I was sleeping on my stomach, wearing pajamas, and since it was summer, I didn't have a blanket on. Then, I felt 2 large fingers suddenly shove hard into my behind. Angry, I assumed it was my wife playing a prank, but when I turned around, no one was there. My wife hadn't even come home from work yet. I knew I wasn't dreaming because my pajama pants had been pushed in, and I had to pull them back out. It was deeply unsettling. Another strange event occurred. The realtor assured me that, as far as records showed, no one had died in the house. However, he did mention something that sent chills down my spine. The previous owner's husband had passed away, but it happened at the hospital, not in the home. He offered to give me the previous owner's contact information if I wanted to ask them directly. When I called the number, a man named Mark answered. I had been expecting a woman, so I was caught off guard. After speaking with Mark for a while, I realized he was gay, and his husband had indeed passed away during their time living in the house, though it had been at the hospital, not at home. After that conversation, it became clear to me that the spirit in our house might be Mark's late husband. While nothing harmful had happened, I couldn't shake the feeling that staying in the house might lead to more problems. I couldn't ignore the strange experiences we'd already had, and I knew it was time to make a decision about our future in that home. Story number 4. When my wife and I bought our dream house, we knew it was the start of something new. The quaint little home at the end of a tree-lined street felt perfect for raising a family someday. But then my mother's health took a sharp decline. She had been sick for years, her frail body battling illness after illness. When hospice became the only option, I made the difficult decision to bring her back home from the hospital. I wanted to place her in a nursing home, but I didn't want our relatives to judge me for doing it. In our culture, we must take care of our elderly until their last breath. My wife supported me, but there was an unspoken tension between us. It wasn't just the burden of care. It was the old belief that had been drilled into me as a child. If someone dies in a house, their spirit lingers there. I loved my mother, but the thought of her spirit tethered to our new home, wandering its halls, unsettled me. So I found a solution. I rented an Airbnb a few blocks away, a small, modest home where she could spend her last days in comfort. It seemed practical, even considerate, but part of me knew it wasn't just practicality, it was fear. According to the doctor, my mother probably had only a few days, maybe a week left. I got the Airbnb thinking it wouldn't cost much for just a short stay. My mother had been sleeping most of the time at our house. She wouldn't even notice she was in a different house. She was too drowsy and confused from the heavy pain meds. The first night at the Airbnb, something strange happened. Her eyes were wide open and wouldn't close. She was tracking something in the bedroom, her gaze moving back and forth like she was watching something we couldn't see. Then she said something that made my skin crawl. "There are 2 noisy kids in here. I can't sleep because of them." I tried to reassure her. I told myself it was just hallucinations from the medication. That night, I stayed with her while my wife was home with our kids. On the second night, my mother struggled with her breathing. I stayed at her bedside, and the hospice nurse came by to give her some anxiety medication to help her relax. She finally fell asleep. When my wife arrived after the nurse left, my mother woke up again and complained about the noisy kids. But this time her face looked worried. She turned to me and said, "The two kids here said your father is at our house looking for me." I felt my stomach drop. "Your father and them are there. Can you tell them to come here?" I forced a smile and told her to relax and breathe. My father had died a decade ago. I chalked up her words to worsening hallucinations. As more medication was administered, my wife and I calmed her down and helped her relax. After a while, she went back to sleep. Then, there was a knock at the door. When I opened it, it was our three kids. Our oldest, who's 14, looked terrified, and the younger two were clinging to each other. "What happened?" my wife and I asked. They said they kept hearing weird noises at the house. They heard a man sobbing in their grandma's room. But when they checked, no one was there. All three of them were genuinely scared. My wife took the kids home with her that night to comfort them. At around 1 a.m., my mother woke up suddenly and whispered my father's name. Then she said something that sent a chill down my spine. "You're here. What time is it?" I checked my phone. "It's 1 a.m. Go back to sleep, Mom." She closed her eyes and seemed to settle. When I woke up at 6 a.m., something felt wrong. I turned to look at my mother. Her face was pale. She wasn't breathing. She was gone. Her body was already stiff. She must have passed a few hours earlier, in her sleep. I contacted the hospice nurse who helped me arrange for the morgue transport. After my mother was taken away, I called the landlord to let him know we'd be checking out early. Story number 5. It was 2002, and this event became the turning point that caused my brother Max and his friends to abandon their misguided attempts to fit in with the local gangs. Max and his friends were wannabe gangsters, the kind no one truly respected. To make a long story short, they were trying to gain recognition from a local gang by starting trouble with a rival gang from the other side of town. One night, everything took a tragic turn. Max's friend, Kor, was killed in a drive-by shooting, a retaliation from the rival gang. The drive-by happened right on the front porch of our house. I remember my parents were home at the time, and as soon as Kor was shot, we dragged him inside. My parents had no idea what was happening or why our house had been targeted. Tragically, Kor didn't survive. He died in my father's arms before the ambulance could take him away. My father immediately confronted Max, demanding to know if he and his friends had provoked someone and why our family was now in danger. That's when Max admitted that he and his friends had been trying to curry favor with the local gang by antagonizing the rival gang. Even though Max had just graduated high school and was already 18 years old, my parents grounded him. My father, furious and scared for our family's safety, told Max that if he wanted to continue down this path, he needed to leave the house and live on his own. Otherwise, he'd have to make a major change. My father even threatened to disown Max if he didn't follow his cousin's example and join the military. With no other options and terrified that the rival gang would come after him, Max reluctantly enlisted in the military. Before Kor's death, he often stayed over at our house, sleeping in the same bedroom that Max and I shared. But after his death, strange things began happening in the house. Items would go missing even though no one had moved them. Some nights, my father would be sitting in the living room watching TV when empty soda cans would suddenly be thrown at him from the dining room. He'd pick up the can, turn on the dining room light, but no one would be there. Sometimes he'd throw the can back into the dining room, only to have it thrown back at him moments later. One night, something happened to me that I'll never forget. I was in my room talking to my girlfriend late into the night. Max wasn't home. He was working a night shift at a casino while waiting for his enlistment process to be finalized. It must have been around 1 a.m. when I thought I heard Max come home early. The door to our room opened and I saw someone walk over to Max's bed and lie down. Moments later, I heard snoring. It was annoying because I didn't want my girlfriend to hear it over the phone, so I decided to get up and move to the closet to continue our conversation in peace. I turned on the closet light, and as I glanced over at Max's bed, I froze. It wasn't Max lying there. It was Core. He was snoring loudly, and his face had a bluish tint, the color of someone who wasn't alive. Terrified, I ran to wake up my parents. My father rushed to my room, but when we looked, no one was there. We all began to suspect that Core was haunting the house, possibly because he died there. Not wanting to live in constant fear, we decided to move to a new home before Max left for the military. After we moved out, we never returned to that house. I don't know if the new occupants experienced anything unusual, but I hope they were able to live there peacefully. As for us, we were just relieved to leave that chapter of our lives behind. That's all for this video. Thank you for making it all the way through and supporting my stories. Have a wonderful day or night.